A rope swung gently in the dim light of the storage shed. The young woman watched it sway, watched her own body dangling limp at its end. Strange how peaceful her face looked now that life had left it. Strange to be standing here, observing her own corpse like a curious spectator. She tried to call out, but no sound came. She tried to touch her own hanging feet, but her fingers passed through them like mist. This wasn't how death was supposed to be. This wasn't peace or heaven or even hell. This was waiting. Naomi Reed jolted awake, a silent scream caught in her throat. The rhythmic clacking of train wheels on tracks gradually pulled her back to reality. She pressed her trembling hands against the cold window glass, watching the desolate landscape of the American West blur past. Endless plains of scrub and dust stretched toward distant mountains, so unlike the crowded streets of Boston she had fled. The dream lingered as it always did, the hanging woman who wasn't her, yet somehow was. And beneath it, other images stirred like creatures beneath murky water. A deep well with darkness spilling from its mouth, children crying out in languages she didn't understand, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Naomi pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the stifling heat in the train car. Her reflection stared back, pale and haunted. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes. Her auburn hair had escaped its pins, wisps of it clinging to her damp forehead. 28 years old and already running from a life that had collapsed around her. "Next stop, Thornwood," the conductor called, moving through the car. "Thornwood, 10 minutes." Naomi's fingers found the worn envelope in her pocket. The 12th letter from Griffin Blackburn, the man who would become her husband before sundown. A man whose handwriting was steady and whose words were sparse, revealing little beyond his need for a wife and his promise of shelter. A man she had never seen. Better the devil unknown than the one whose fists you've already felt, she thought grimly. The train whistle shrieked, and Thornwood announced itself with a cluster of weathered buildings shimmering in the late afternoon heat. As the train slowed, Naomi gathered her single valise, all that remained of her former life. Inside were 2 dresses, a worn Bible that had belonged to her grandmother, and 11 previous letters from Griffin Blackburn, tied with string. The platform was nearly empty when she stepped down. A station master dozed in the shade, barely acknowledging her arrival. 2 women passing by with market baskets paused their conversation to stare openly at her, then hurried on, whispering behind gloved hands. Thornwood sprawled before her, a dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple rising like an accusatory finger against the vast sky. It wasn't a town so much as an outpost, clinging to existence on the edge of wilderness. Naomi stood alone, the hot wind tugging at her travel-worn skirts. She felt eyes watching from windows and doorways, curious about the newcomer but unwilling to welcome her. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. What had she done? Traded one prison for another, perhaps, only this one surrounded by hundreds of miles of emptiness instead of Boston's crowded streets. Then she saw him. He stood in the shadow of the station's overhang, still as granite. At first glance, Naomi mistook him for part of the building's support structure. So solid was his presence, so immovable his stance. Griffin Blackburn was tall, taller than any man had a right to be, his broad shoulders straining against a faded cotton shirt. His face was partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the glint of eyes studying her with unsettling intensity. When he stepped into the light, Naomi's breath caught. He was not handsome in any conventional sense. His face was weathered by sun and wind, a long scar running from just below his right ear down into his collar. His black hair, streaked with premature silver, was tied back at the nape of his neck. But it was his eyes that held her, gray as storm clouds and just as turbulent, set deep in a face that had known hardship and carried its marks openly. Those eyes widened slightly as they took in Naomi, a brief flicker of surprise quickly masked. Whatever he had expected, she was not it. "Miss Wilson?" His voice was deeper than she had imagined from his letters, rough like stones tumbling in a creek bed. "Mr. Blackburn." She managed to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I'm Naomi." He said nothing for a long moment, just studied her with those storm cloud eyes. Then he reached for her valise. Their fingers brushed momentarily as she relinquished it, and a strange image flashed through Naomi's mind. a young boy running through smoke, screaming soundlessly. She pulled her hand back as if burned. "You're not what I expected," he finally said, no inflection in his voice to indicate whether this was disappointment or simply observation. "Neither are you," she countered, lifting her chin slightly. Something that might have been amusement softened his expression for the briefest moment. "Fair enough." He led her to a wagon hitched to two enormous horses. Without warning, his hands encircled her waist, lifting her onto the seat as effortlessly as if she were a child. The casual display of strength made Naomi's heart quicken, though whether from fear or something else, she couldn't say. Griffin climbed up beside her, the wagon creaking under his weight. He snapped the reins, and the horses pulled forward, leaving Thornwood behind in a cloud of dust. They rode in silence as the town shrank behind them and the vast empty landscape opened before them. 3 hours to the ranch, he finally said. No water between here and there. Naomi nodded, stealing glances at his profile. In his letters, Griffin had been factual but vague about his life. A cattle ranch in need of care, a house built with his own hands, no family to speak of, nothing about the scar on his neck or the shadows in his eyes. "The winters here are harsh," he continued, as if delivering a warning she should have heeded before boarding the train. "Snow can cut you off for weeks. Animals come down from the hills when food grows scarce, wolf, cougar, not a place for those used to city comforts." "I didn't come seeking comfort, Mr. Blackburn," Naomi said quietly. His eyes flicked to her, then back to the trail. "What did you come seeking then?" "Safety, escape, somewhere to hide from what I see." "A fresh start," she said instead, the practiced answer. The wagon hit a rut, jolting them both. Naomi gripped the seat's edge to steady herself. As her fingers pressed against the worn wood, something strange happened. She heard whispering, faint, impossible, seeming to rise from the earth beneath the wagon wheels. Words in a language she didn't understand, urgent and pleading. She drew her hand back sharply. Griffin noticed. "You hear it?" Not a question. Cold dread pooled in Naomi's stomach. "Hear what?" Griffin's jaw tightened, the scar on his neck whitening. "The land here isn't like other places. It listens." He said nothing more, leaving Naomi to wonder if she had imagined the whispers or if her new husband was as mad as people had claimed her grandmother to be. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they finally crested a hill, and Griffin pointed ahead. Blackburn Ranch. Below them sprawled a modest homestead, a 2-story wooden house, weathered silver by sun and wind, a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings. A windmill turned lazily beside what appeared to be a well. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and crimson, making the place seem almost welcoming. As they approached, Naomi noticed odd symbols painted in rust red above the doors and windows, not decorative but deliberate, like wards. Griffin caught her staring, but offered no explanation as he helped her down from the wagon. "I'll show you the house," he said, carrying her valise toward the porch. Naomi followed, noting with unease that there were no locks on any of the doors. When she remarked on this, Griffin paused, hand on the doorframe. "Locks won't keep out what I worry about," he said simply, then pushed the door open. Inside, the house was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's dwelling. Plain but functional furniture, clean floors, a kitchen with an iron stove, and a table set with 2 mismatched plates. A staircase led to the upper floor, and a narrow hallway stretched toward the back of the house. "Your room is upstairs, first door," Griffin said, already climbing the stairs with her valise. "I've kept it ready." Ready for what? Naomi wondered as she followed. Ready for whom? The words first door implied other rooms, other occupants, yet Griffin had written of living alone. The bedroom was larger than she had expected, dominated by a 4-poster bed covered with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a rocking chair by the window completed the sparse furnishings. Everything was clean but faintly musty, as if the room had been closed up for a long time. "I'll sleep downstairs," Griffin said, setting her valise down. "Give you space to settle in." Before Naomi could respond, he was already headed back downstairs, his heavy footsteps receding. She stood alone in the silence, listening to the unfamiliar creaking of this new house, this new life. That night, sleep eluded her. The bed was comfortable enough, but every sound, the wind in the eaves, the distant lowing of cattle, the house settling, startled her awake. Near midnight, a new sound joined the others, a faint scratching beneath the floorboards, as if something were moving down there. Not a rodent or insect. This was more deliberate, almost like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. Naomi sat upright, heart hammering. The scratching continued, moving from beneath her bed toward the door. She held her breath, watching the moonlight patterns on the floor, half expecting to see the boards lift. Instead, movement at the window caught her eye. A face, a young woman with long black hair and eyes like polished obsidian, stared in at her from outside. Impossible, given that Naomi's room was on the second floor. Naomi blinked, and the face was gone. But the certainty that she had been watched remained, settling cold and heavy in her stomach. She didn't sleep again until dawn painted the horizon. Morning light revealed what darkness had hidden. From her bedroom window, Naomi could see the full extent of Blackburn Ranch, a modest spread nestled in a shallow valley, surrounded by rolling hills that gave way to distant mountains. A creek wound through the property like a silver ribbon. Cattle grazed in the far pasture. It was beautiful in a harsh, untamed way. When she ventured downstairs, Griffin was already at the stove, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the kitchen. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You slept poorly," he observed, not a question. Naomi paused in the doorway, wondering how he knew. "The house makes unfamiliar sounds." Griffin nodded, turning back to the stove. "It settles at night. You'll get used to it. And the face at my window, the scratching beneath the floors, will I get used to those too?" But she said nothing as she sat at the table. Griffin placed a plate before her, eggs, bacon, and a biscuit, then filled a mug with coffee and set it beside the plate. The domesticity of the gesture was at odds with his rugged appearance. "Thank you," Naomi said, genuinely surprised. "I didn't expect you to cook." "Been feeding myself for 20 years, he replied, sitting across from her with his own plate. "No reason to stop now." They ate in silence for a while, the awkwardness of strangers who were now, legally at least, husband and wife. Naomi studied him covertly. In daylight, Griffin Blackburn looked older than she had first thought, perhaps early 40s. Deep lines bracketed his mouth and creased the corners of his eyes. His hands were massive, calloused from work, but he handled his fork with surprising delicacy. "I saw someone last night," Naomi finally said, setting down her coffee mug. "A young woman outside my window." Griffin's fork clattered against his plate. His eyes, when they met hers, were sharp with alarm. "You shouldn't speak of things you see in the night," he said, voice low and tense. "Not here." "Why not?" "Because some things, once acknowledged, don't go away." He stood abruptly, taking his half-eaten breakfast to the sink. "I need to check the herd. The house needs sweeping, if you're willing. Supplies in the pantry." The change of subject was deliberate, but Naomi persisted. "The markings above the doors, what are they for?" Griffin's back stiffened. Without turning, he said, "Protection." "From what?" He faced her then, and something in his expression made Naomi regret asking. "From what this land remembers, Miss Wilson." "Mrs. Blackburn," she corrected automatically. A shadow crossed his face. "Yes, of course." He left her then, striding out the back door toward the barn, leaving Naomi alone with her questions and a house that seemed to breathe around her. The day passed in a blur of domestic tasks. Naomi swept floors, wiped down surfaces, and familiarized herself with the layout of the house. Besides her bedroom, the upper floor contained two other rooms, one empty save for a desk and bookshelf, the other locked. The ground floor had the kitchen, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, Griffin's bedroom off the back hall, and a small pantry. While cleaning a high shelf in the pantry, Naomi discovered an odd collection of items: small animal bones tied with twine, pouches of dried herbs that smelled sharply medicinal, and a small jar containing what appeared to be dried blood. She was still staring at these finds when Griffin returned in the late afternoon, bringing with him the smell of horses in open air. He stopped in the pantry doorway, his expression darkening when he saw what she had found. "Those aren't for cooking," he said flatly. Naomi set the bone bundle down carefully. "What are they for?" "Medicine, old ways." He reached past her to take the items, his arm brushing hers. Again came that strange flash. Not just images this time, but sounds, smells, gunpowder, screaming, smoke thick enough to choke on. Naomi stumbled back, gasping. Griffin caught her elbow to steady her, then quickly released her when he saw her expression. "What did you see?" he demanded, voice tight with worry. "Nothing," she lied, rubbing her arm where he had touched her. "Just dizzy for a moment." He clearly didn't believe her, but didn't press. "Supper in an hour," he said instead, pocketing the bone bundle and leaving her alone. That night, they ate in silence. Afterward, Griffin retreated to the porch with a pipe while Naomi washed the dishes. Through the window, she could see him staring out at the darkening land, his profile severe in the fading light. Not for the first time, she wondered what kind of man she had married. A man with secrets, certainly. A man familiar with old ways and protective symbols. A man who spoke of land that listened and seemed unsurprised that she had seen a face at her second-story window. She was drying the last plate when a knock came at the front door. Griffin rose quickly from his chair, hand moving to his belt, where Naomi now noticed he wore a knife. He motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door. "Who's there?" he called, tension evident in every line of his body. "Just an old man with medicine," came a reedy voice. "Open up, Grey Wolf. I know you've brought another one." Griffin's shoulders relaxed slightly. He opened the door to reveal an elderly Native American man, white-haired and lean, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. Despite his apparent age, the man's black eyes were sharp as flint. "Silas," Griffin acknowledged, stepping aside to let him enter. Silas Redmoon moved with surprising agility for one so old. He stopped when he saw Naomi, his head tilting like a curious bird's. "So," he said, "this is the new wife." Griffin made a curt introduction. "Naomi, this is Silas Redmoon. He brings herbs sometimes." "Silas, this is Naomi." "Blackburn." Silas ignored Griffin's discomfort with the name, his focus entirely on Naomi. "She sees," he said, not to her, but about her, as if she weren't present. "Like Caroline did." Naomi's skin prickled. "Caroline?" Griffin stepped between them. "Silas, enough. What do you want?" The old man finally shifted his gaze to Griffin, speaking rapidly in a language Naomi didn't understand. Griffin responded in kind, his voice tense. Though she couldn't comprehend the words, the argument was clear. Silas insistent, Griffin resistant. Finally, Silas turned back to Naomi. "The land chooses who it calls," he said cryptically. From a pouch at his waist, he withdrew a small leather bag and held it out to her. "Put this under your pillow when you sleep. It will keep them from speaking to you." Naomi hesitated, then accepted the bag. It smelled of sage and something sharper, metallic. "Thank you," she said, uncertain. Silas nodded once. "You are not the first he has brought here, but you might be the last." With that enigmatic statement, he turned and left as suddenly as he had arrived. Griffin closed the door behind him, his face a mask of controlled anger. Before Naomi could question him about Caroline or the old man's warning, he stalked past her toward his room. "Griffin," she called after him, the first time she had used his given name. "Who was Caroline?" He stopped back to her, shoulders rigid. "No one you need concern yourself with." "She saw things too, didn't she? Like I do." Griffin turned slowly, his eyes narrowed. "What do you see, Naomi?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. All her life, she had been careful never to admit what she saw. Not after her grandmother's fate, not after her fiancé's reaction. But something in Griffin's gaze told her he would know if she lied. "People who aren't there," she said quietly. "Sometimes. And last night, scratching under the floor." Griffin closed his eyes briefly as if her words confirmed a fear. When he opened them, she saw not disbelief or disgust, but resignation. "Use Silas's medicine," he said, "and don't speak of what you see. Not yet." He turned away again. "Good night, Mrs. Blackburn." That night, Naomi did place the small bag beneath her pillow. Whether it was the medicine or simply exhaustion, she slept deeply for the first time since arriving. But her dreams were vivid and strange. She dreamed of a young Native American woman with fierce eyes who led her across the moonlit property to a well near the windmill. The woman pointed down into the well's depths, her mouth moving urgently, though no sound came. Naomi leaned forward, trying to see what lay below, but all she could make out was darkness. A darkness that seemed to breathe, to pulse with malevolent life. She woke with the certainty that she knew where to find the well. A week passed, falling into a cautious rhythm. Griffin rose before dawn, tended to ranch chores, and returned for meals. Naomi kept house, learned to manage the kitchen stove, and began exploring the property, though she carefully avoided the well from her dream. They existed in parallel, these not quite strangers legally bound to one another. Griffin was unfailingly polite but distant, retreating to his room each evening after supper. Naomi caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't decipher. Concern mixed with something darker, almost like dread. On the eighth day, Naomi was hanging laundry when she discovered a small, carved wooden chest beneath Griffin's mattress. She hadn't meant to pry, she was only changing his bedding, but the corner of the chest poked out from beneath the straw tick. She hesitated only briefly before lifting it out. It wasn't locked. Inside were photographs, daguerreotypes and tintypes of young women, perhaps a dozen in all. Two had names inscribed on the back: Caroline Dixon, 1879, and Eleanor May, 1882. Caroline had been blonde and pretty, with a softness to her features. Eleanor was darker, more serious-looking. Neither resembled the Native American woman from Naomi's dream, yet something about their eyes disturbed in her, a haunted quality that seemed to transcend the photographic medium. Beneath the photographs lay a half-written letter in feminine handwriting. I cannot bear the dreams anymore. They speak to me from below, from the well, calling for justice. G says the rituals will quiet them, but I feel them growing stronger. Last night I saw the darkness take shape. The letter ended there, the final word trailing off as if the writer had been interrupted. The paper was stained with what might have been tears or blood. Naomi returned everything to the chest with trembling hands, tucked it back under the mattress, and finished making the bed. Questions burned in her mind. Who were these women? What had happened to them? And most disturbingly, were they Griffin's previous wives? That evening, when Griffin returned from mending fences in the north pasture, Naomi watched him with new eyes. He moved with the careful precision of a man accustomed to containing his strength, yet there was a tenderness in how he treated fragile things. The china cups, the old books on his shelves, and she realized herself. Could those hands have harmed Carolyn or Eleanor? Had they written those letters she'd found in her valise, pretending to be Griffin Blackburn? Or worse, was Griffin himself just a fiction, a mask worn by someone else? You're staring, Griffin observed as he washed up for supper. Naomi didn't look away. Who is Caroline Dixon? Water dripped from Griffin's suddenly still hands. Slowly he reached for a towel, his back to her. Where did you hear that name? Silas mentioned her, said she saw things like I do. Griffin turned, his face carefully composed. Caroline was someone who lived here before. She left. And Eleanor May? Now alarm flashed across his features. Have you been in my things? I found photographs while changing your bedding, Naomi admitted, lifting her chin defiantly. Were they your wives? No. The word came out sharp, almost angry, then softer, not legally. They were like you, women who answered my letters, who came here seeking new lives. What happened to them? Griffin's gaze dropped. They couldn't bear it here. The isolation, the land. His voice lowered almost to a whisper. The things they saw. Did you harm them? His head snapped up, genuine shock in his eyes. No, I tried to protect them. From what? Griffin ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. From what the land wanted from them. From what it wants from you. Before Naomi could question him further, a sound came from upstairs. A distinct footstep, followed by the creak of floorboards. Both froze, listening. Another step, then another. Stay here, Griffin ordered, already moving toward the stairs, knife drawn. Naomi ignored him, following close behind. There's someone in my room. They climbed the stairs silently, Griffin leading the way. The door to Naomi's room stood ajar, though she was certain she had closed it. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. The bed was made as she had left it that morning, the curtains drawn back to admit the evening light. No one could have hidden in the small space without being immediately visible. Yet as they stood in the doorway, the rocking chair by the window began to move, a gentle, rhythmic creaking, as if someone invisible sat there. Griffin muttered something under his breath in that strange language he shared with Silas. The rocking slowed, then stopped. "What was that?" Naomi whispered, clutching the doorframe for support. "A visitor," Griffin said grimly. "One who doesn't know boundaries." He crossed to the window and drew a symbol on the glass with his thumb, the same mark that adorned the doorframes throughout the house. As he did, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. The curtains stirred as if in a breeze, though the window was closed. "Leave this place," Griffin said to the empty air, voice commanding. "You have no claim here." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, written in the condensation that had formed on the mirror of Naomi's dresser, letters appeared as if traced by an unseen finger. "She belongs with us," Naomi gasped, stumbling backward into the hallway. Griffin followed, pulling the door shut behind him with such force that the entire frame shuddered. "Pack a bag," he said, voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We're going to town. Now." "Why, what's happening?" Griffin gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. "Because it's starting again, and I can't protect you here tonight. Please, Naomi, trust me this once." The desperation in his voice convinced her. 20 minutes later, they were in the wagon, racing toward Thornwood as the last light faded from the sky. Behind them, Naomi thought she saw a figure standing on the porch of the house, a young woman with long black hair, watching them leave with solemn eyes. Thornwood after dark was a different entity from the drowsing settlement Naomi had first encountered. Lanterns glowed in windows, casting warm rectangles of light onto the dusty street. The saloon buzzed with activity, tinny piano music spilling into the night. A few men lounged on the boardwalk outside, eyeing the newcomers with undisguised curiosity. Griffin drove the wagon straight to a small, clapboard house at the edge of town. A sign hanging from the porch post read, "Rooms for Mrs. Caldwell, proprietor." He helped Naomi down, then took their small bags and led her to the door. A stout woman with graying red hair answered his knock, surprise giving way to recognition. "Mr. Blackburn," she said, eyes darting to Naomi. "Don't often see you in town." "Need a room for the night, Mrs. Caldwell," Griffin said, "for my wife and myself." The woman's eyebrows rose at the word wife. She studied Naomi with renewed interest. "Wife, is it? How many is that now, Mr. Blackburn?" Naomi felt Griffin tense beside her. "Just one, ma'am," he replied evenly. "The only one, Mrs. Caldwell looked skeptical but stepped aside to let them enter. "One room's all I have. $1 for the night, breakfast included." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and rocking chair, similar enough to her room at the ranch to make Naomi uneasy. Griffin set their bags down and immediately went to the window, drawing the same protective symbol on the glass. "I need to see someone," he said, turning back to her. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." "Griffin," Naomi caught his arm as he moved to leave. "Tell me what's happening, please." He hesitated, conflict evident in his face. "When I return," he promised. "For now, stay here. Stay safe." He gently disengaged from her grasp and was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Naomi locked it as instructed, then sank onto the edge of the bed, mind racing. The events at the ranch, the mysterious footsteps, the rocking chair, the message on the mirror, replayed in her thoughts. What had Griffin meant by "it's starting again"? What had happened to Caroline and Eleanor? And who was the woman from her dreams, the one she had seen watching them leave? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Naomi froze, remembering Griffin's warning. "Mrs. Blackburn?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. "My name is Dr. Ambrose Porter. I'm a historian researching the area. Might I have a word?" Naomi approached the door cautiously but didn't unlock it. "My husband isn't here." "I know," came the reply. "That's why I've come now. There are things about Griffin Blackburn you should know for your own safety." "What things?" "The fate of his previous companions, for one. Caroline Dixon didn't leave, Mrs. Blackburn. Neither did Eleanor May." A chill ran through Naomi. "How do you know their names?" "Because I've been researching what happened at Sugarloaf Creek 15 years ago, and all paths lead back to your husband's ranch, and that old well." A pause. "Please, I mean you no harm. I only want to warn you." Against her better judgment, Naomi unbolted the door and opened it a crack. Ambrose Porter was younger than she had expected, perhaps mid-30s, with neatly trimmed blonde hair and beard. He wore spectacles that magnified intelligent blue eyes, and his clothing marked him as an Easterner, too fine for the frontier. "May I come in?" he asked, glancing nervously down the hallway. Naomi hesitated, then stepped back to admit him. Porter entered quickly, removing his hat. "Thank you. I wouldn't normally intrude upon a lady's privacy, but time may be short." He withdrew a leather folio from inside his coat. "I've been documenting what locals call the Sugarloaf Creek Massacre. In 1870, a cavalry unit attacked a Cheyenne settlement near what is now your husband's ranch. Over 60 men, women, and children were killed." He opened the folio to reveal newspaper clippings, military reports, and hand-drawn maps. "The bodies were disposed of in an old well, the same well that now sits on Blackburn property." Naomi thought of her dream, the Native American woman pointing down into darkness. "What does this have to do with Caroline and Eleanor?" Porter's expression grew grave. "According to my research, strange occurrences have plagued that land since the massacre. Locals whisper about voices from the well, apparitions, livestock found mutilated. When Griffin Blackburn, who wasn't always called that by the way, bought the property in '78, the phenomena seemed to quiet for a time. He laid out a daguerreotype showing a military unit. Then Blackburn began bringing women to the ranch. Always outsiders, always alone. Carolyn Dixon arrived in '79, disappeared in '80. Eleanor May came in '82, vanished the same year. There were others, though I haven't confirmed all their names." Naomi stared at the photograph, at the young men in uniform standing stiffly for the camera. "Are you suggesting my husband killed these women?" Porter shook his head. "I don't know what happened to them, but I do know there's a connection between the massacre, that well, and the women who vanished from Blackburn Ranch. And I believe you're in danger, Mrs. Blackburn." Before Naomi could respond, the door burst open. Griffin stood there, face thunderous with rage. Behind him loomed Silas Redmoon, leaning on his walking stick, but somehow no less imposing for his age. "Get away from my wife," Griffin growled, advancing on Porter. The historian scrambled to his feet, gathering his papers. "Mrs. Blackburn deserves to know the truth about the man she married, about what happened to the others." Griffin seized Porter by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "There is no truth in your books and papers, historian. Only fragments twisted to fit your theories." "Griffin, stop!" Naomi cried, fearing he might harm the man. Surprisingly, he obeyed, releasing Porter with a disgusted shove. Silas moved between them, his dark eyes fixed on the historian. "You dig where you shouldn't, White Shadow," the old man said. "Some graves are best left undisturbed." Porter straightened his collar, defiance replacing fear. "The truth can't stay buried forever, old man, not with more women disappearing." He turned to Naomi. "Ask him about Matthew Graywolf. Ask him about the scout who led the cavalry to Sugarloaf Creek." Griffin lunged forward again, but Silas blocked him with surprising strength for one so frail-looking. "Go," the old man commanded Porter, "while you still can." The historian gathered his folio and backed toward the door. "Be careful, Mrs. Blackburn. Whatever he calls himself now, your husband has blood on his hands." With that, he slipped out and was gone. Silence fell over the room, heavy with unspoken accusations. Naomi looked from Griffin's face, rigid with anger and something that might have been shame, to Silas's impassive countenance. "Is it true?" she finally asked. "About Caroline and Eleanor?" Griffin turned away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Not as he tells it." "Then tell me your version," Naomi insisted. "I deserve that much." Silas sat in the rocking chair, looking suddenly every year of his considerable age. "Tell her, Graywolf," he said wearily, "or the land will show her in ways far less gentle than words." Griffin nodded once, resignation in the gesture. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, unable to meet Naomi's eyes. "My name was Matthew Graywolf," he began, voice low and rough. "My mother was Cheyenne, my father a white officer who left before I was born. I grew up caught between two worlds, belonging to neither." He described a youth spent in poverty and prejudice, his attempts to find acceptance among white society always rebuffed. Finally, desperate to prove himself, he had enlisted in the cavalry as a scout. "I was good at it," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. "Tracking, reading sign, understanding the land." The army valued these skills without valuing the man who possessed them. Then came the fateful assignment to locate a Cheyenne encampment reported to be harboring warriors who had attacked a settler family. Griffin, Matthew then, had indeed found the camp, not realizing until too late that it was one where distant relatives of his mother lived. When I recognized the settlement, I tried to warn them, tried to stop the attack, he said, anguish evident in every line of his body. Captain Wallace wouldn't listen. He gave the order, and the killing began. Naomi listened in horror as Griffin described the massacre. Men shot where they stood, women and children hunted down as they fled, teepees set ablaze. When it was over, the bodies had been thrown down an old well to hide the evidence. The official report claiming only hostile warriors had been engaged. I tried to save some, smuggled a few children away during the chaos. For that, I was shot by my own commander and left for dead. Griffin touched the scar on his neck. But I didn't die, and when I recovered, I was a ghost to both worlds, traitor to the whites, failure to the Cheyenne. He had disappeared then, working his way west, changing his name, avoiding both soldiers and natives. Eventually, he had saved enough to buy the land at Sugarloaf Creek, not knowing at first that it contained the very well where the massacre victims had been discarded. The voices started almost immediately, Griffin continued. At first, just in dreams. Then while awake, whispers from below ground, footsteps when no one was there. Silas found me half mad, taught me the old rituals that might quiet the spirits. For years, the rituals had worked. The land had been relatively peaceful. Then Caroline had arrived, a mail-order bride like Naomi, seeking escape from an abusive past. She heard them too, Griffin said quietly. Saw things, like you do. The land called to her, used her sensitivity to reach out. Carolyn had become obsessed with the voices, with the well. She claimed the land was conscious, that it wanted justice, retribution. She had begun to perform her own rituals at the well, trying to communicate with whatever dwelled there. One night she was just gone. Griffin's voice broke. I found her shawl by the well, nothing else. I searched for weeks. Eleanor's story had been similar. Initial sensitivity to the supernatural, growing obsession, eventual disappearance. After her, Griffin had sworn never to bring another woman to the ranch. He had lived alone for 3 years. Then I dreamed of you, he said, finally meeting Naomi's gaze. Night after night, a woman with auburn hair and green eyes, standing on my porch as if waiting to be invited in. The dreams became more insistent until I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Silas said the land was calling again, that it had chosen someone new. So you wrote to me, Naomi whispered, understanding dawning. Not out of loneliness or need for a wife, but because something compelled you. Griffin nodded, shame evident in his face. I told myself I would be stronger this time, that I would protect you from what happened to the others. But tonight, when I saw the writing on the mirror, he trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Silas spoke into the silence. The land is waking again, hungrier than before. What was trapped in the well is finding its voice, in its vessel. What exactly is in that well? Naomi asked, dreading the answer. Not just the dead, Silas replied cryptically, but what formed from their suffering, their rage, them, a darkness older than the massacre, that fed on that tragedy like a feast. As if on cue, a violent gust of wind rattled the window. The symbol Griffin had drawn there shimmered and began to fade, as if being erased by an unseen hand. In its place appeared words, scratched into the glass itself. Found you, Naomi stumbled back with a cry of alarm. Griffin was on his feet instantly, pulling her behind him as if to shield her from whatever had written the message. We can't stay here, Silas said urgently. It's found you, even in town. Where can we go? Griffin demanded. If it can reach us here. My cabin, the old man replied. Sacred ground, protected by older magics than this thing knows. As they hurriedly gathered their belongings, Naomi's hand brushed against her valise. The clasp sprang open, spilling her few possessions onto the bed. Among them was an item she didn't recognize, a small leather-bound journal, its cover stained and worn. She picked it up with trembling fingers. This isn't mine. Griffin stared at the journal, face draining of color. That's Caroline's. Before he could stop her, Naomi opened the book to its final entry. Dated October 17th, 1880, the child has come, the child from the well. God help us all. The journey to Silas's cabin unfolded like a waking nightmare. They rode through darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the lantern's glow, their wagon wheels crunching over dry earth that whispered beneath them. Naomi clutched Caroline's journal to her chest, as if the dead woman's words might shield her from whatever pursued them. Griffin drove with grim determination, his knuckles white on the reins. Beside him, Silas murmured continuously in his native tongue, prayers or protective chants, Naomi couldn't tell which. The old man's voice provided the only counterpoint to the growing howl of wind that chased their heels. "Storm's coming," Griffin said, eyes fixed on the invisible horizon. "Bad one." As if summoned by his words, the first fat raindrops began to fall, striking like cold fingers against Naomi's skin. The wind intensified, bending the scrub brush that dotted the plains and driving the rain sideways. "There!" Silas pointed toward a faint light bobbing in the darkness, a lantern hanging outside a low structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. They reached the cabin just as the storm unleashed its full fury. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark, white flashes that burned after images on Naomi's retinas. In those frozen moments, she saw shapes moving across the plains that matched no animal she knew. Tall, elongated figures that seemed to flow rather than walk. Griffin lifted her from the wagon and hurried her inside while Silas tended to the horses. The cabin was a single room, simply furnished with a bed, table, shelves lined with jars and pouches, and a stone fireplace where embers glowed dimly. Every available surface was adorned with symbols similar to those in Griffin's house, but more elaborate, more ancient-looking. "You're safe here," Griffin assured her, though the tightness in his voice belied his confidence. He moved to the fireplace, adding wood to revive the flames. Silas entered on a gust of wind, securing the door behind him. He shook the rain from his long white hair and immediately went to a shelf, selecting herbs and roots with practiced hands. "The girl is feverish," he announced, glancing at Naomi. "It's already beginning." Naomi started to protest that she felt fine when a wave of dizziness struck her. The cabin tilted sideways, and she would have fallen if Griffin hadn't caught her, guiding her to the bed. His hands felt impossibly cool against her suddenly burning skin. "What's happening to me?" she gasped, as heat spread through her veins like liquid fire. "The land is trying to claim you," Silas replied, crushing herbs in a stone mortar. "Speak through you. The fever is its first attempt to weaken your defenses." Griffin pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. "Fight it, Naomi. Stay with us." But darkness was already encroaching on the edges of her vision, reality dissolving into fragments. Faces swam before her. Caroline, Eleanor, the Native American woman from her dreams. Behind them loomed a shape of pure shadow, its edges constantly shifting, its center a void that pulled at her consciousness. "They're calling me," she whispered, unsure if the words actually left her lips or merely echoed in her mind. From the well. So many voices. Griffin's face hovered above her, fear etched into every line. "Don't listen. Focus on my voice. Stay here with me." Silas appeared beside him, a steaming cup in his gnarled hands. She must drink all of it. Together they raised her head, pressing the bitter liquid to her lips. Naomi choked on the first sip. It tasted of earth and blood and something older still. But Griffin's gentle insistence compelled her to continue until the cup was empty. Almost immediately the room began to spin. The firelight stretched and warped, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. Naomi heard herself speaking, but the words were not her own. A language she had never learned poured from her mouth in a torrent of harsh syllables. Griffin recoiled, horror plain on his face. Silas gripped his arm, restraining him. "It's not her," the old man said firmly. "Remember that. Whatever speaks through her lips, it is not your wife." Wife. The word penetrated Naomi's delirium. They were legally married, yes, but in name only. Yet in this moment of extremity, the designation seemed to matter to Griffin, to anchor him as he watched her thrash and babble in the grip of whatever force had seized her. The storm raged through the night, matching Naomi's fever in its intensity. Time lost meaning, stretching and contracting like a living thing. Sometimes she surfaced briefly into lucidity, aware of Griffin bathing her face with cool water. of Silas chanting as he burned sacred herbs. Other times she plunged into visions so vivid they seemed more real than the cabin around her. She saw the massacre at Sugarloaf Creek, not as Griffin had described it, but through the eyes of its victims. She felt their terror as soldiers descended upon the camp at dawn, heard the screams of children torn from their mothers' arms, tasted gunpowder and blood in the air. And she witnessed a younger Griffin, no, Matthew then, desperately trying to intervene, taking a bullet in the neck from his commanding officer when he attempted to save a child. The scene shifted. Now she stood at the edge of the well, looking down into its depths. But it wasn't water she saw below. It was a mass of writhing darkness, punctuated by glimmers like eyes opening and closing. As she watched, the darkness began to climb the stone walls, reaching for her with tendrils of pure shadow. Naomi! Griffin's voice cut through the vision, dragging her back to reality. Stay with me. Dawn was breaking, gray light seeping through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. Naomi's fever had broken as well, leaving her weak and soaked with sweat, but clear-headed once more. Griffin sat beside the bed, his face haggard with exhaustion. He hadn't slept, she realized, had kept vigil through her ordeal. You came back, he said softly, relief evident in his voice. Naomi struggled to sit up. Every muscle ached, as if she had run for miles. Was I gone? For a while, his hand hovered near hers on the blanket, not quite touching. You spoke things, names of the dead, details of the massacre no living person knows. Silas approached, offering a cup of clear water. The land spoke through you. It has chosen you as its vessel, as it chose the others before you. Naomi drank gratefully, the cool water soothing her raw throat. I saw everything, she whispered. The attack, the killings. I saw you, Griffin. You tried to stop it. Pain flashed across his features. Not hard enough. Not soon enough. You were shot for your efforts, she countered. I saw that too. Griffin looked away, unable to accept even this small absolution. After a moment, he rose and moved to the window, staring out at the rain-washed landscape. Dawn painted the wet plains in shades of pearl and gold, deceptively peaceful after the night's chaos. The storm's passed, he said. We should return to the ranch while we can. There may be another tonight. Silas shook his head. The girl needs rest. I'll be all right, Naomi insisted, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The world tilted briefly, then righted itself. I want to go home. The word surprised her. When had Griffin's isolated ranch become home? As they prepared to leave, Silas took Naomi aside, pressing a small leather pouch into her palm. Keep this with you always, he instructed. It will help clear your sight when the visions come. The woman I keep seeing, Naomi asked. The young Native American woman. Who is she? Silas's eyes widened slightly. You see Shadowhawk? If that's her name, yes. She led me to the well in my dreams. She watches the house. The old man glanced at Griffin, who was outside preparing the wagon. Shadowhawk was my daughter's child, he said quietly. She died at Sugarloaf Creek. She is connected to your husband, though he does not know it. How? That is for her to reveal, not me. But know this, she does not seek to harm you. Unlike the thing in the well, she may be trying to help. Before Naomi could question him further, Griffin called from outside. It was time to leave. The ride back to the ranch was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Naomi dozed fitfully, still weak from her fever, her head occasionally coming to rest against Griffin's shoulder. Each time he tensed momentarily, then relaxed, careful not to disturb her. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, Griffin reined the horses to a stop. Naomi blinked awake, momentarily confused by the concern on his face. What's wrong? She asked, following his gaze. The ranch appeared undamaged by the storm. The house stood intact. The windmill turned lazily in the morning breeze. But standing on the porch, as if waiting for their return, was a figure Naomi recognized immediately, the young woman from her dreams. Shadowhawk. Griffin's breath caught. You see her too? Naomi nodded. She's been in my dreams since I arrived. Silas called her Shadowhawk. The figure raised one hand in what might have been greeting or warning, then vanished. not fading gradually, but disappearing between one blink and the next. She's never appeared to me before, Griffin said, voice tight with worry. Only to Caroline and Eleanor near the end. Near the end of what? He snapped the reins, urging the horses forward. Near the end of their time here. Upon entering the house, they found evidence of disturbance. Chairs overturned, cabinet doors flung open, Griffin's books scattered across the floor. What's disturbing of all was what awaited them in Naomi's bedroom. The word remember gouged repeatedly into the wooden floor. The dresser mirror shattered. It's getting stronger, Griffin said grimly, surveying the damage. The barriers are failing. Naomi knelt beside the carved words, tracing them with her fingers. As she did, a flash of insight struck her. It's not trying to frighten us, she realized. It's trying to communicate. Griffin looked skeptical. By destroying our home? It doesn't know another way. Naomi stood, suddenly certain. The journals, Griffin, Caroline's and any others. I need to read them all. He hesitated, then nodded. There's a chest in the root cellar. I've kept everything they left behind. As Griffin went to retrieve the chest, Naomi found herself drawn to the window. Outside, the day was beautiful. Bright sunshine, a few scattered clouds, a gentle breeze stirring the tall grass. Hard to believe that something malevolent lurked beneath this peaceful scene. That darkness waited just below the surface. Movement caught her eye. Shadowhawk again, standing by the corral. The spectral woman beckoned, then pointed toward the windmill and the well beneath it. When Griffin returned with a battered wooden chest, Naomi was waiting by the door, her resolve hardened. I need to see the well, she announced. No. His refusal was immediate and absolute. It's too dangerous. Shadowhawk is trying to show me something there. Something important. Griffin set the chest down heavily. Naomi, that well has claimed 2 women before you. I won't let it take a third. It's already trying to take me, she countered. Through fever, through dream. At least this way I choose the encounter. They argued back and forth, Griffin's protective instincts warring with Naomi's determination. Finally, seeing she would not be dissuaded, he relented, with conditions. We go together. We don't approach closer than 10 feet, and we leave at the first sign of trouble. Naomi agreed, though privately she wondered how they would recognize trouble in a situation already so far beyond normal experience. The well sat in the shadow of the windmill, its stone rim rising 2 feet above the ground. A heavy iron cover, secured with chains and a padlock, sealed its mouth. The ground around it was bare. No grass grew within a 6-foot radius, as if the soil itself had been poisoned. As they approached, Naomi felt a strange pressure in her ears, like the sensation before a thunderstorm. The air seemed thicker here, harder to breathe. Beside her, Griffin moved with the caution of a man approaching a coiled rattlesnake. There, Naomi whispered, pointing. Shadowhawk stood on the far side of the well, more solid-looking in daylight than she had appeared in dreams. Her long black hair lifted slightly in a breeze that affected nothing else around them. Her dark eyes held Naomi's with solemn intensity. Griffin followed Naomi's gaze, his face tightening. I see her now, he breathed. God help me, I see her. Shadowhawk extended one hand toward Griffin, her expression softening with something like recognition. Then she turned her attention to the well itself, pointing downward emphatically. She wants us to open it, Naomi realized. No. Griffin's voice was strangled. We can't. She's trying to help us, Griffin. Silas said. I don't care what Silas said. Griffin's outburst startled even himself. More quietly, he added, that well contains the bodies of 63 people, Naomi, and something else, something that formed from their suffering. Opening it would be like uncorking a bottle of poison. Shadowhawk's form flickered, her image growing less distinct. She made one more urgent gesture toward the well, then vanished, leaving behind a profound silence. Naomi approached the well's edge, ignoring Griffin's protest. The iron cover was inscribed with symbols similar to those that protected the house, but more complex, more numerous. Several appeared to have been recently reinforced, the red paint still vivid against the rusted metal. You've been maintaining these, she observed. Griffin nodded. Every full moon. It's part of the ritual Silas taught me. Blood offering, renewed symbols, names spoken aloud, names of the dead. All that I know, all that Silas could remember. He joined her at the well's edge, though reluctance marked every movement. It kept things quiet for a time, until Caroline came, and then Eleanor. Naomi studied his face, and now me. The land calls to those who can hear it, Griffin said softly. Those with sensitivity to the other side. Carolyn heard the voices from the well. Eleanor saw the dead walking. And you've seen spirits all your life, haven't you? The directness of the question startled her. Naomi had never admitted her ability to anyone except her grandmother, who had shared it, and who had ended her life in an asylum, labeled insane for speaking of what she saw. Since I was a child, she confirmed. My grandmother too, before she... Naomi couldn't bring herself to complete the sentence. Before she took her own life, Griffin finished gently. That's why you left Boston, isn't it? Not just an abusive fiancé. You were seeing more spirits, more frequently. People were beginning to notice. Tears pricked Naomi's eyes. They called her crazy, locked her away. I visited every Sunday and watched her fade a little more each time, until finally she swallowed hard. I couldn't bear the same fate. Griffin's hand covered hers on the well's stone rim, the first time he had deliberately touched her since their wedding. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. You're not crazy, Naomi. What you see is real. Too real. His fingers tightened around hers. But that doesn't mean you have to face it alone. The simple comfort of human contact after months of isolation nearly undid her. Naomi turned her hand beneath his, interlacing their fingers. For one suspended moment, they stood connected, two broken people finding unlikely solace in each other. Then a sound rose from the depths of the well, a low, keening wail that might have been wind through stone or a distant human cry. The chains securing the cover rattled, though there was no breeze to move them. Griffin pulled Naomi away from the well, positioning himself between her and the ancient structure. It knows we're here, he said grimly. It knows we're considering opening it. We need to leave. Now. They retreated to the house, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against their backs the entire way. That night, Naomi immersed herself in the journals Griffin had preserved. Carolyn Dixon's account was the most extensive. Nearly a year of entries chronicling her gradual awareness of the supernatural forces at work on the ranch. Her handwriting evolved over time, starting neat and controlled, deteriorating into frantic scrawls as her obsession with the well grew. April 3rd, 1880. The voices are constant now. They speak in a language I don't understand, yet somehow I know what they want. Justice. Release. G says his rituals keep them contained, but I wonder if that's a mercy. To be trapped between worlds, neither living nor truly at peace. June 17th, 1880. Saw the woman by the well again. She's trying to tell me something important. G can't see her, grows angry when I speak of her mom, says it's too dangerous to approach the well alone, but I must know what she wants. August 29th, 1880. The darkness is taking form now. Not just voices, not just glimpses. Last night it stood at the foot of my bed, a shape like a man but not, edges constantly shifting, center empty as a pit. It spoke my name. The final entries grew increasingly disjointed, references to the child from the well appearing with disturbing frequency. The very last page, dated October 17th, contained only the cryptic line they had already seen. The child has come. The child from the well. God help us all. Eleanor's journal was briefer, but followed a similar trajectory. Initial curiosity giving way to obsession, then fear. Her final entry, simply, it wants a body, a vessel. I cannot let it take mine. Griffin found Naomi still reading by lamplight well past midnight, Caroline's journal open on her lap. You should rest, he said from the doorway, reluctant to enter her room after the previous night's manifestation. Naomi looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from strain. Did you know Caroline was pregnant when she disappeared? Griffin's face went very still. What? She mentions it here obliquely. Naomi indicated a passage from mid-September. 2 lives now, not just mine. How can I leave when it would mean leaving part of G behind? Griffin crossed to her side, taking the journal with unsteady hands. I didn't know, he whispered. She never told me. And this reference to the child from the well, what does it mean? Could she have given birth before she vanished? Griffin sank into the chair beside her bed, the journal clutched in white-knuckled fingers. If she did, I never found any trace of an infant. But he hesitated as if afraid to voice his thoughts. But what? The thing in the well, the darkness. Silas always said it sought physical form. A vessel, as Eleanor wrote. What if it found one? The implication chilled Naomi to the bone. You think it somehow possessed Carolina's unborn child? I don't know. Griffin ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 42 years. But the timing of her disappearance, these references to the child, it's possible she believed that's what was happening. They sat in silence, contemplating this horrific possibility. Finally, Naomi voiced the question that had been forming since she began reading the journals. Griffin, what if we're approaching this all wrong? What if the entity in the well isn't trying to possess me, but trying to communicate through me? What if what it really wants isn't a vessel, but acknowledgement, justice? Griffin looked skeptical. It's destroyed two women's minds, Naomi. Whatever it wants, it's not benevolent. But what if those women weren't destroyed, but transformed? What if they found a way to give the entity what it needed? By disappearing without a trace, by abandoning everything? Anger edged his voice now. That's not a solution, Naomi. That's surrender. She recognized the fear beneath his anger, fear of losing her as he has lost the others. It softened her response. I'm not suggesting surrender. I'm suggesting understanding. If we knew what this entity truly wanted, perhaps we could find a way to help it find peace without anyone else being lost. Griffin's expression remained doubtful, but he didn't immediately dismiss her theory. Progress of a sort. Get some rest, he finally said, rising to leave. We'll discuss this more tomorrow. But sleep, when it came, brought no rest for Naomi. Her dreams were vivid, immersive, not disjointed images but coherent narratives unfolding before her dreaming consciousness. She stood in a Cheyenne encampment, children playing, women working at daily tasks. A young woman, Shadowhawk, sat outside a teepee, sewing intricate beadwork onto a moccasin. She was heavy with child, her movements careful around her swollen belly. The scene shifted. Dawn light, screams, gunfire. Cavalry soldiers swarming through the camp. A young Griffin, Matthew in uniform, shouting for them to stop, being struck down by an officer with captain's bars. Shadowhawk running, one hand protecting her unborn child, the other dragging a small boy behind her. Another shift. Shadowhawk hiding in a ravine, the boy beside her terrified into silence. Labor pains beginning, intensified by fear. The officer finding them, shooting Shadowhawk without hesitation, taking the traumatized boy away as a souvenir of the campaign. Shadowhawk's body, along with so many others, thrown down the well. But her spirit, refusing to depart, clinging to the physical world out of a concern for two children, the boy who had been taken and the unborn child who had died with her. Naomi woke with tears on her face and a certainty bone deep. Shadowhawk was trying to tell her something vital about the children, about a connection to Griffin that he himself didn't know. She found him on the porch at dawn, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun crest the eastern hills. He looked as if he hadn't slept at all. I need to tell you about my dream, Naomi said without preamble. Griffin listened in silence as she recounted the vision, his expression growing increasingly strained. When she described Shadowhawk's pregnancy, he set his mug down with a thud, coffee sloshing over the rim. It's not possible, he insisted. I'd have known if I had family in that camp. Would you? You said yourself you were raised apart from your mothers of people, that you were estranged from both worlds. But why would Shadowhawk appear to you, to Caroline and Eleanor, and only now to me? If we share blood, perhaps because you weren't ready to see, Naomi suggested gently. Perhaps because you've been so focused on atoning that you couldn't bear to know there was more to atone for. Griffin stood abruptly, pacing the length of the porch. Even if what you dreamed is true, what does it change? The dead are still dead. The well still contains something malevolent. You're still in danger. It changes everything, Naomi insisted. If Shadowhawk is connected to you by blood, if her concern is for her children, then perhaps what we're dealing with isn't just a vengeful entity, but a mother's desperate attempt to protect what's hers. Griffin stopped pacing, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. And the darkness in the well? The thing that nearly claimed you in fever? That's destroyed my home? Threatened our lives? That's maternal concern? No, that's something else entirely. Something that may have taken advantage of the trauma at the well, fed on it, grown from it. But it's not the same as Shadowhawk. She's trying to help us fight it. He turned to face her, conflict evident in every line of his body. If what you say is true, if Shadowhawk is connected to me somehow, then I've failed her twice over. First in life, then in death. Naomi rose, closing the distance between them. Or perhaps this is your chance to make things right. For her, for the others, for yourself. Griffin met her gaze, something vulnerable surfacing in his storm gray eyes. And for you? Where do you fit in this tragedy, Naomi? The question caught her off guard. Where indeed, mail-order bride, reluctant medium, potential sacrifice to an entity she barely understood? Or something else? Something she was only beginning to consider as she looked at this broken, honorable man before her. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I intend to find out. A sound from within the house interrupted them, a door slamming, though there was no wind. They exchanged glances and hurried inside. The back hallway door stood wide open, swinging gently on its hinges. As they watched, it slammed shut with enough force to rattle the windows, then immediately swung open again. It's getting stronger, Griffin muttered, moving cautiously down the hallway. The door led to the one room Naomi had never entered, the locked room at the end of the upstairs corridor. Except now, it wasn't locked. The door stood ajar, a thin sliver of darkness visible through the gap. Griffin hesitated at the foot of the stairs. Stay here. Not a chance, Naomi replied, already ascending beside him. The room beyond the door was a nursery, or had been once. A wooden cradle stood in the center, draped with cobwebs. A rocking chair, a small dresser, faded curtains at the window. Everything covered in a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for years, except the walls. The walls were covered in drawings, childish at first glance, but disturbing upon closer inspection. Dark figures with too many limbs, eyes where eyes shouldn't be. A well repeated obsessively in different sizes. And throughout, a black shape that seemed to shift and writhe, even as they stared at the static images. Caroline's work, Griffin said quietly, after she began hearing the voices. Naomi approached the cradle, a sense of dread building with each step. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in yellowed cloth. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Don't, Griffin warned, but too late. Naomi unwrapped the bundle to reveal a crude doll made of twig bound with hair, human hair, in two colors, black and blonde. Attached to the doll was a folded paper. She opened it with unsteady fingers. Written in what appeared to be blood were the words, "The child needs a mother. You will do." As Naomi stared in horror, the doll moved, not falling or shifting, but deliberately turning its twig head to face her. From somewhere below them came the sound of breaking glass, followed by a child's laughter. Griffin grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. We need to leave, now. They descended the stairs to find every mirror in the house shattered, their fragments arranged on the floor to form a single word, mine. Outside, the sky had darkened prematurely, heavy clouds gathering though no storm had been forecast. The wind rose, carrying with it the smell of old blood and wet earth. Silas, Griffin said grimly. We need to get back to Silas. But as they rushed to hitch the wagon, a figure appeared on the path from town. Dr. Ambrose Porter, mounted on a bay horse, a leather satchel strapped to his saddle. He raised a hand in greeting, apparently oblivious to the supernatural chaos enveloping the ranch. Mr. Blackburn! Mrs. Blackburn! He called. I've come to apologize for my behavior at the boarding house, and to share some new information that may help explain what's happening here. Griffin moved to intercept him, keeping himself between Porter and Naomi. This isn't a good time, historian. Porter dismounted anyway, retrieving his satchel. I think you'll want to hear this. It concerns a child, a survivor of the Sugarloaf Creek massacre. Despite his wariness, Griffin's attention was caught. What child? A boy, approximately 4 years old at the time, taken by Captain Wallace as a trophy of sorts, raised as his ward. Porter withdrew documents from his satchel, official military reports, newspaper clippings, a daguerreotype of a stern-faced officer standing beside a Native American child. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face as she recognized the officer, the same man who had shot Shadowhawk in her dream. The boy's name was recorded as Gabriel, Porter continued. But the Cheyenne woman he was found with called him Tokala, Griffin interrupted, voice barely audible. Little Fox. Porter's eyebrows rose. You know the name? My mother's sister had a son called Tokala. Griffin's face had gone ashen. I played with him as a child, before my mother took me away from the tribe. I never knew what became of him. Your cousin? Naomi asked, the pieces falling into place. Then Shadowhawk would be my aunt, Griffin finished, the revelation staggering him visibly. And if she was pregnant when she died, then you have another cousin you never met, Porter concluded, watching their exchange with keen interest. One who died with his mother that day. Griffin gripped the porch railing for support. Where is Tokala now? What became of him? Porter's expression grew somber. That's the other reason I came. Judge Wallace, the captain, after he left the military, died 3 days ago, murdered in his home in Thornwood. His throat was cut with a stone knife, and a symbol was carved into his chest. He produced a sketch. This symbol. The drawing matched one of the images from the nursery walls, a stylized well with a figure emerging from it. And Tokala? Griffin pressed. Missing. He'd been living as Gabriel Wallace all these years, working as the judge's clerk. After the murder, he vanished. A terrible suspicion began to form in Naomi's mind. This Judge Wallace, did he have any connection to Caroline Dixon or Eleanor May? Porter nodded. He officiated both their marriages to Mr. Blackburn. In fact, he was the one who suggested they answer his advertisements for a bride, according to town gossip. Griffin and Naomi exchanged horrified glances as understanding dawned. He sent them here, Griffin whispered, knowing what they would face, knowing they could hear the voices, see the spirits. But why? Naomi wondered. A child's laugh echoed from the direction of the well, sending chills down Naomi's spine. All three turned to see a figure standing beside the windmill. Not Shadowhawk this time, but a young man in his 20s, dressed in the clothes of a town clerk. His features were clearly Cheyenne, but his eyes held a darkness that had nothing to do with their natural color. Because, Porter said quietly, I believe the entity in that well has found its vessel, and it's been wearing your cousin's skin for 15 years. The young man by the well smiled, a terrible, knowing smile that transformed his handsome features into something predatory. Though he stood 50 yards away, his voice carried to them with unnatural clarity. Cousin, he called to Griffin, how kind of you to finally recognize me. Griffin took an instinctive step forward, then caught himself. Tokala? He asked, uncertainty plain in his voice. The young man's smile widened. Sometimes, when he's stronger than I am. He cocked his head, studying Griffin with unnerving intensity. You look like her, you know, around the eyes. Shadowhawk's blood runs strong. What have you done with my cousin? Griffin demanded. A shrug, too fluid to be entirely human. We share accommodations, an arrangement 15 years in the making. His gaze shifted to Naomi, and she felt the weight of it like a physical touch. Cold, assessing, hungry. You've chosen better this time, cousin. She's stronger than the others. She might even survive what's coming. Naomi found her voice despite the fear clawing at her throat. What do you want from me? The thing wearing Tokala's skin laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. A vessel, of course. A mother. This body has served its purpose, but it's deteriorating. I need something fresher. Porter had edged closer to the porch steps, his scholarly detachment replaced by naked fear. What is it? He whispered. What are we dealing with? Griffin kept his eyes fixed on the creature by the well. Something older than the massacre. Something that was already there, trapped in the earth, when the bodies were thrown down the well. It fed on their pain, their rage, used it to take form. Very good, cousin, Tokala, or the thing controlling him, called. You always were the clever one. That's why the old man took you under his wing, taught you his pathetic rituals. Did they comfort you? Did they ease your guilt? Silas tried to help me contain you, Griffin replied. To give the dead some peace. And peace, the word emerged as a snarl. There is no peace for the murdered, only justice. He gestured expansively. And I am justice incarnate. 15 years I've waited, growing stronger with each sacrifice. Wallace was the first. There will be others. The women, Naomi realized aloud. Caroline and Eleanor. You took them. Tokala's gaze returned to her, his eyes now completely black, as if filled with liquid shadow. I showed them the truth, offered them a choice, serve me willingly or be consumed. Caroline chose poorly. Eleanor was wiser. His smile turned reminiscent. She made a beautiful vessel for a time. Griffin's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Where are they now? Gone, used up, as all vessels are eventually. Tokala took a step toward them, and the air around him seemed to ripple like heat waves. But you, Naomi Reed, yes, I know your true name. You have potential beyond the others. The blood of seers runs in your veins. You've walked with one foot in the spirit world since childhood. A chill ran through Naomi at the sound of her maiden name on his lips. How do you know that? I know everything about you. Your grandmother who died in chains because she saw the truth. Your fiancé who beat you for speaking of ghosts. Your desperate flight west, hoping distance would silence what you hear. Another step forward. But it didn't, did it? The voices only grew stronger, because they were calling you here. To me. Porter had retreated to his horse, fumbling with his saddlebags. Blackburn, he hissed. We need to go. Now. But Griffin seemed unable to move, transfixed by the creature wearing his cousin's form. What do you want from us? He asked hoarsely. Tokala's expression softened into something almost gentle. From you, nothing, cousin. Your guilt has sustained me for years, a feast of self-loathing. But it's grown stale. He turned his gaze to Naomi. From her, I want surrender, acceptance, a new vessel to replace this failing form. And if I refuse, Naomi asked, already knowing the answer, then I'll take what I need by force, as I did with Caroline. Griffin finally broke from his paralysis, moving to stand between Naomi's soul and the advancing figure. You'll have to go through me first. Tokala laughed. Gallant but futile. You can no more stop me than you could stop the cavalry that day. You failed them then. You'll fail her now. Porter had retrieved something from his saddlebags, a revolver which he now aimed at Tokala with shaking hands. Stay back, he warned, cocking the hammer. Tokala didn't even glance in his direction. With a dismissive flick of his wrist, the historian was thrown backward, as if struck by an invisible hand, landing hard against the side of the barn. The revolver discharged harmlessly into the air. Humans, Tokala sighed. So fragile. He focused again on Griffin and Naomi. I'll give you until moonrise tomorrow to decide, cousin. Bring her to the well willingly, and I'll be merciful, both to her and to what remains of Tokala. Refuse, and I'll take her anyway, along with anyone else I find in my path. His eyes, now completely black, fixed on Naomi. Consider carefully, seer. I can give you what you've always wanted, understanding of your gift, mastery over it. No more fear, no more hiding. With that, he turned and walked away, not toward town but toward the distant hills. Within moments, he had vanished from sight, though whether by supernatural means or simple distance, Naomi couldn't tell. Griffin exhaled shakily, the tension draining from his body now that the immediate threat had passed. Porter, he called, hurrying to where the historian lay slumped against the barn. The younger man was conscious but dazed, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. What was that? He managed. Something beyond your history books, Griffin replied grinnily, helping him to his feet. Can you ride? Porter nodded, wincing at the movement. I think so. Then go. Get to Silas. Tell him what's happened. Tell him we need him at the ranch by nightfall. And you? Griffin glanced at Naomi, resolve hardening his features. We'll prepare as best we can. Now go, before that thing changes its mind and comes back. As Porter mounted his horse and galloped toward town, Griffin led Naomi back to the house. Inside, the evidence of the entity's power was everywhere. Shattered glass, furniture overturned, the cryptic word, mine, still spelled out in mirror fragments on the floor. It knows everything, Naomi said, sinking into a kitchen chair. About my past, my grandmother, things I've never told anyone. It's been watching you, Griffin confirmed, pouring whiskey into two glasses with a hand that trembled only slightly. Probably since before you left Boston. These things, they can sense potential vessels across great distances. How do you know so much about it? Griffin handed her a glass, then sat heavily across from her. Silas, his people have stories about such entities. Spirit eaters, they call them. Ancient, patient predators that feed on human suffering and can manifest physically under the right conditions. He took a long swallow of whiskey. The massacre created those conditions. All that pain, that injustice, it was like opening a door. And Tokala, how did he become that? Griffin's expression darkened. I can only guess. Wallace took him after killing Shadowhawk, raised him in that house, filled with hatred and probably abuse. When Tokala was old enough to understand what had happened to his people, to his mother, he trailed off. The entity offered revenge, Naomi finished, a way to make Wallace pay, at the cost of his own humanity. Griffin stared into his glass. 15 years. He's been possessed for 15 years, and I never knew he survived. Never even looked for him. You couldn't have known, Naomi said gently. I should have. His voice was harsh with self-recrimination. Shadowhawk has been appearing to you, to the others, trying to warn us. Her own son, corrupted by that thing, and I've been blind to it all. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of revelation pressing down on them like a physical burden. Finally, Naomi asked the question that had been forming since Tokala's departure. What are we going to do? Griffin drained his glass. We're going to fight. They spent the afternoon preparing, though what defense could truly be mounted against such an entity, neither could say. Griffin reinforced the protective symbols around the house, mixing his own blood with the red paint as Silas had taught him. Naomi gathered supplies, food, water, matches, blankets, in case they needed to flee. In the root cellar, Griffin revealed a hidden cache of weapons, not just conventional firearms, but items clearly meant for supernatural combat. Silver knives, pouches of herbs and powdered minerals, a small carved box containing what appeared to be human finger bones. Silas's contributions, Griffin explained, gathering the items. I've never had cause to use them before. Will they work against whatever Takala has become? I don't know. The admission clearly cost him. The rituals I performed over the years were meant to contain what was in the well, to give the dead some peace. I never thought I'd be facing it directly. As sunset approached, Griffin led Naomi to a room she hadn't known existed, a small chamber hidden behind a bookcase in the sitting room. Unlike the rest of the house, this space had no windows, no external doors. Every surface was covered in protective symbols, some painted, others carved directly into the wood. I built this after Eleanor disappeared, Griffin said, lighting an oil lamp that cast dancing shadows across the warded walls. A last resort if the entity ever broke free of the well. Inside were supplies for a more elaborate ritual than the monthly observances Griffin had described. A circle of stones, candles of various colors, bundles of dried herbs, a stone bowl for burning, and a knife with a bone handle intricately carved with symbols. Silas believes that if the entity can be separated from Takala, it might be forced back into the well, Griffin explained, arranging the items with practiced movements. With the proper ritual, we might be able to seal it there permanently. And Tokala? Griffin's hands stilled. If he's been possessed for 15 years, there may be little left of him to save. The thought was heartbreaking. Another victim of violence that had begun decades before and rippled outward, claiming new casualties with each generation. Naomi touched Griffin's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. We have to try, she said, for Shadowhawk's sake, if nothing else. He nodded, covering her hand with his own. The gesture, simple as it was, conveyed a trust that had been building between them, forged in shared danger and mutual understanding. A knock at the front door startled them both. Griffin reached for his revolver. Stay here, he instructed, closing the hidden door behind him as he went to investigate. Naomi listened, heart pounding, as Griffin's footsteps crossed the sitting room, then the entryway. She heard the door open, followed by Silas's distinctive voice, and exhaled in relief. When Griffin returned with the old medicine man, Silas's normally impassive face was lined with concern. Porter followed, still pale from his encounter with the entity, but apparently determined to see the situation through. "He told me everything, Silas said without preamble, nodding toward Porter. "Tokala lives, or something wearing his skin does." Griffin nodded grimly. "It's given us until moonrise tomorrow to surrender Naomi. After that, after that it will come for her regardless," Silas finished, "and it will destroy anyone in its path." Porter, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "I've been researching this phenomenon since I first learned of the disappearances here. There are similar cases documented, rare but consistent in their patterns. In each instance, the entity required a human host, preferably one with sensitivity to the spiritual realm." "Like me," Naomi said quietly. Porter nodded. "Like you, like the others before you." "What happened in those other cases?" Griffin asked. "Was the entity ever defeated?" Porter's expression wasn't encouraging. "Sometimes contained, rarely destroyed. These things are persistent." "Then containment is our goal," Silas declared, surveying the ritual items Griffin had assembled. "We must separate it from Tokala and force it back into the well, then seal the well with stronger magic than before." "And if we fail?" Naomi asked. The old man's eyes were grave. "Then we ensure it cannot take you as its next vessel." The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood. If the entity couldn't be contained, Naomi might have to be sacrificed to prevent it from gaining her power. The thought should have terrified her, yet she felt an odd calm. Better to die free than live as a prisoner in her own body, watching helplessly as an ancient evil used her form to inflict suffering. "I understand," she said softly. Griffin's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. "It won't come to that," he promised, though they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. They spent the night in preparation, reinforcing protections, reviewing the rituals Silas proposed, gathering strength for the confrontation to come. Porter proved unexpectedly useful, his academic knowledge complementing Silas's practical wisdom. Together, they refined the ritual, incorporating elements from various traditions that might strengthen its efficacy against the entity. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the land, they gathered on the porch to watch the sun rise. The day ahead would bring either victory or destruction. There would be no middle ground. "I need to speak with you," Griffin said quietly to Naomi, leading her away from the others. "Alone." They walked to the corral where Griffin's horses watched them with liquid eyes, somehow sensing the tension that permeated the ranch. When they were out of earshot of the house, Griffin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "If this goes wrong today," he began, voice rough with emotion, "if we can't stop this thing." "Don't," Naomi interrupted, not wanting to hear contingency plans for her death. "We will stop it. But if we can't," he persisted, "I need you to know something." He drew a deep breath. "When I wrote those letters, asked you to come here, it wasn't just because the land called to you or because this entity manipulated events. Part of it was me, just a man, lonely and seeking connection. And since you've been here, despite everything, the danger, the strangeness, I've found myself." He struggled for words. "Caring for me?" Naomi offered gently. Griffin's eyes met hers, vulnerability plain in their depths. "More than caring. When you're near, I feel whole, as if something broken inside me is finally mending." The admission, so at odds with his usual stoic demeanor, touched Naomi deeply. She raised a hand to his cheek, feeling the roughness of stubble beneath her palm. "I feel it too," she confessed. "Despite everything, or perhaps because of it. You see me, all of me, even the parts others have called madness, and you don't turn away." For a moment they stood suspended in mutual recognition, two damaged souls finding unexpected resonance in each other. Then with a tenderness that belied his strength, Griffin drew her closer. His lips, when they met hers, were gentle, hesitant, a question rather than a demand. Naomi answered by leaning into the kiss, her arms encircling his neck. For one perfect moment, the world narrowed to this single point of connection, this affirmation of life in the shadow of approaching danger. When they finally parted, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens today," he whispered, "know that you've brought light to a place that had known only darkness for too long." Naomi nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting her throat. Together they walked back to the house, hands joined, drawing strength from each other for the ordeal ahead. As morning gave way to afternoon, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, not a natural weather pattern, but a manifestation of the entity's growing power. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with potential like the moments before lightning strikes. Inside the hidden room, they made final preparations. Silas had drawn an elaborate pattern on the floor, concentric circles inscribed with symbols from traditions both native and European. At cardinal points around the outermost circle, he placed items of power: a bundle of sage and sweetgrass, a small pouch of earth from the Cheyenne burial grounds, a silver mirror, its surface facing downward, and a knife with a bone handle. The entity must be lured into the circle, Silas explained. Once there, the ritual will begin. We must time it precisely with the rising of the moon. How do we lure it? Porter asked, adjusting his spectacles nervously. Silas and Griffin exchanged glances. It wants Naomi, Griffin said grimly. She'll be within the circle. As bait? Porter looked appalled. As the focal point, Silas corrected. Her connection to the spirit world makes her both vulnerable to the entity and potentially powerful against it. With proper preparation, she may be able to help separate it from Takala. Naomi nodded, accepting this role despite the fear it inspired. What must I do? Silas handed her a small leather bag on a cord. Wear this around your neck. It contains protective herbs and a fragment of mirror to reflect the entity's power back upon itself. He then produced a small clay pot containing a dark paste. This goes on your forehead, palms, and over your heart. It will help you see beyond the entity's illusions to perceive Tokala trapped within. As Silas applied the paste, its sharp medicinal scent filled Naomi's nostrils, making her eyes water. Almost immediately, her vision altered subtly. Colors became more vivid, shadows more distinct. She could see faint traces of light surrounding each person in the room. Auras, her grandmother would have called them. I can see more, she whispered. Silas nodded, satisfied. The veil between worlds thins for you now. Use this sight wisely. Do not let it overwhelm you. Griffin approached, carrying a small silver flask. One last precaution, he said, handing it to Naomi. Holy water from the church in Thornwood, mixed with salt and silver dust. If the entity comes too close before we can complete the ritual, throw this at it. It may buy you a few seconds. The weight of the flask in her hand was both reassuring and terrifying, a tangible reminder of the danger she would soon face. Naomi tucked it into her pocket, then looked up to find Griffin watching her with an expression of such tender concern that it nearly undid her composure. I'll be right beside you, he promised, every moment. The hours crawled by, tension building with each tick of the mantel clock. They ate a simple meal, though none had much appetite. Porter paced nervously, consulting his notes and occasionally peering out the windows at the darkening sky. Silas sat in meditative silence, eyes closed, lips moving in soundless prayer. Griffin and Naomi remained close, drawing comfort from each other's presence. They spoke little, but their hands frequently found each other, fingers interlacing in silent communication. As sunset approached, they moved to positions around the property. Porter would keep watch from the upper floor, signaling when Tokola appeared. Silas and Griffin would wait in the hidden room with Naomi, ready to begin the ritual the moment the entity was lured inside. Remember, Silas instructed as they took their places, once it enters the circle, you must close it immediately. He handed Griffin a pouch of red ochre. Use this to complete the outer ring. Then we begin the chant. No matter what happens, no matter what it says or shows you, do not break the circle until the ritual is complete. The final rays of sunlight faded from the sky, leaving only the eerie glow of approaching storm clouds. In the distance, lightning flickered, though no thunder followed, silent electrical discharges that illuminated the landscape in brief, surreal flashes. From upstairs came Porter's signal. 3 rapid knocks. He had spotted Tokala approaching. It's time, Griffin said, his voice steady despite the fear Naomi could see in his eyes. They took their positions, Naomi in the center of the innermost circle, Silas at the northern point where the sage bundle lay, Griffin at the western point with the pouch of sacred earth. The eastern and southern points, marked by the mirror and knife respectively, remained unoccupied for now. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours. Then a sound, footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. The front door opened, though they had locked it. Footsteps crossed the entryway, approached the sitting room. The bookcase concealing the hidden room slid aside without anyone touching it, and there stood Tokala, or the thing wearing his form. In the enhanced state of perception granted by Silas's paste, Naomi could see the entity more clearly now. A darkness that clung to Tokala like a second skin, pulsing with malevolent energy. But beneath it, barely visible, was something else. A flickering light, dim but persistent. The last remnants of Tokala's human spirit, not yet fully consumed. How domestic, the entity said, surveying their arrangement with amusement. The three of you, waiting to welcome me. Its gaze fixed on Naomi. Have you made your decision, seer? Naomi forced herself to meet those black eyes. I have. I'll go with you, but on my terms. The entity's borrowed face registered surprise, quickly masked. Your terms? You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Aren't I? Naomi gestured to the circles drawn on the floor. You need me willing. Caroline fought you, and look what happened to her. A flash of anger distorted Tokala's features. She was weak. You are not. Then prove it. Enter the circle with me. Show me what you offer. The knowledge, the power you promised. Convince me. The entity hesitated, its gaze sliding to Griffin and Silas. And your protectors? They simply allow this? They understand my choice, Naomi replied, hoping her voice conveyed a confidence she didn't entirely feel. For a long moment, the entity considered, its borrowed eyes calculating. Then it smiled, that terrible, inhuman smile that transformed Tokala's face into something monstrous. Very well, seer. Let us negotiate. It stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the outer circle. Griffin immediately moved, completing the circle with the red ochre Silas had provided. The entity spun, snarling as it realized the trap. Now, Silas cried, lighting the sage bundle with a match. Griffin began to chant in the Cheyenne language, words Silas had taught him, an invocation of ancestors, a plea for their aid. Silas joined, his aged voice gaining strength as the ritual built momentum. The entity roared, the sound more bestial than human. It lunged toward Naomi, but some invisible barrier prevented it from crossing the innermost circle. Frustrated, it turned its rage on the room itself. Furniture splintered, walls cracked. The very air seemed to vibrate with its fury. You think your pathetic symbols can hold me? It snarled. I, who have fed on the anguish of 63 souls. I, who have worn this flesh for 15 years. As if to demonstrate its power, the entity began to change. Tokala's form blurring, stretching, darkness seeping from his pores like black sweat. The room grew colder, frost forming on the walls despite the summer heat outside. Naomi stood firm in her circle, though terror threatened to overwhelm her. She focused on the flickering light within Tokala, the last spark of his humanity. That was their target, to separate that spark from the darkness consuming it. The chanting continued, rising in intensity. Silas moved to the eastern point of the circle, lifting the silver mirror and turning it face up. Its surface caught the light from the single lamp, reflecting it back at the entity in a beam that seemed unnaturally bright. The entity shrieked, shielding its eyes. Enough of this! With a gesture, it extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness broken only by the mirror's reflected glow. In that moment, it struck, not physically, but mentally, sending a wave of psychic force toward Naomi that hit like a physical blow. Images flooded her mind. Her grandmother in the asylum, wasting away. Her former fiancé, face contorted with rage as he struck her. Her parents' disappointment and fear when she tried to explain what she saw. Every painful memory, every moment of rejection and isolation, amplified and twisted into weapons against her. Naomi staggered but did not fall. Dimly she heard Griffin calling her name, felt Silas's steady presence anchoring the ritual. Drawing on their strength, she pushed back against the mental assault. You can't break me with my own past, she gasped. I've already faced these demons. The entity changed tactics. Suddenly, Naomi was no longer in the hidden room but standing in a vast twilight landscape. Around her, spirits moved, not the tortured ghosts of her nightmares, but peaceful beings of light. Among them, she recognized her grandmother, young again and smiling. "This could be yours," Tokala's voice whispered, though his form was nowhere to be seen. "Understanding, acceptance, power beyond your imagining. No more fear, no more hiding. Join with me and walk between worlds freely." The vision was seductive in its beauty, offering everything Naomi had secretly longed for: mastery of her abilities, communion with spirits on her own terms. For a moment, she wavered. Then a new presence entered the vision. Shadowhawk, her face grave with warning. She pointed to the spirits surrounding Naomi, then made a dissolving gesture with her hands. The message was clear: illusion, not reality. "No," Naomi said firmly, "this isn't real, and even if it were, the price is too high." The vision shattered like glass, returning Naomi to the hidden room. The entity stood before her, its borrowed form flickering between Tokala and something less human, a shape of shadow and malice. "Then you will join me unwillingly," it hissed, gathering itself for a final assault. But in that moment of transition, as it shifted between forms, Naomi saw her opportunity. Within the unstable mass of darkness, Tokala's essence was briefly exposed, a small, bright core surrounded by corruption. "Griffin," she called, "the knife!" Understanding instantly, Griffin moved to the southern point of the circle, seizing the bone-handled knife. In one fluid motion, he tossed it to Naomi, who caught it by the handle. The entity, realizing their intent, howled in rage and lunged toward her. But Naomi was already moving, the knife raised not to strike flesh, but to cut through the darkness enveloping Tokala's spirit. "Tokala," she cried, "if you can hear me, fight. Remember who you are. Remember Shadowhawk." At the mention of his mother's name, a change came over the entity's borrowed face, a flicker of recognition, of human awareness pushing through the corruption. The darkness faltered, its grip on Tokala momentarily weakened. Naomi seized that moment to act. With a single, decisive movement, she slashed the knife through the air between them, not touching Tokala physically, but cutting the energetic bonds that tied his spirit to the entity. For an instant, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, the darkness separated from Tokala's form. An oily, writhing mass hovering beside the young man, who collapsed to his knees, gasping. "Now," Silas shouted, "complete the ritual." Griffin rushed to Naomi's side as she swayed, exhausted by the psychic effort. Together, they joined Silas in the final phase of the ritual, a binding chant meant to force the entity back into the well from which it had emerged. The darkness fought, lashing out with tendrils of pure shadow. One struck Porter, who had come downstairs upon hearing the commotion, throwing him against the wall. Another wrapped around Silas's throat, trying to silence his chanting. A third reached for Naomi, only to be intercepted by Griffin, who cried out in pain as it touched him. Despite these attacks, they persevered, the chant building to a crescendo as moonlight, the full moon now risen, streamed through a crack in the wall, striking the center of the circle. With a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, the darkness contracted, then exploded outward. Not in attack, but in retreat, flowing like liquid smoke through the cracks in the walls, the floorboards, racing toward the well outside. Tokala remained on his knees, trembling violently. His eyes, now normal human eyes, were wide with shock and recognition. "Matthew," he whispered, staring at Griffin. "Is it really you?" Griffin nodded, emotion choking his voice. "It's me, little fuss, I'm here." Before they could say more, Silas cried out in warning. "It's not over. The entity seeks the well, not to return, but to draw power from it." Understanding the danger, Griffin helped Tokala to his feet. "Can you walk?" The young man nodded weakly. "I think so." "Then come, we must finish this." They rushed outside, supporting each other, to find the night transformed. The storm clouds had coalesced directly above the well, spinning in a vortex of unnatural energy. Lightning struck repeatedly at the same spot, the iron cover of the well, which was now glowing red-hot. The darkness had gathered there, seeping around the edges of the cover, trying to force its way into the well. Not to return to imprisonment, but to merge with whatever remained of its original form below, to become whole and infinitely more powerful. "We can't let it rejoin with the source," Silas shouted over the howling wind. The seal must be broken first, then reforged with all of us participating. Griffin stared at him in disbelief. Break the seal? After all these years keeping it intact? Trust me, the old man insisted. It's the only way. Naomi understood suddenly what Silas proposed. The voices from the well, they're not just victims. They're guardians. They've been containing this thing all along, at the cost of their own peace, Berudao. Silas nodded grimly. Exactly. They need release to fight alongside us. Then we can create a new binding, stronger than before. Griffin hesitated only a moment, then nodded. What do we do? Break the chains, remove the cover. But be ready, once opened, everything changes. With grim determination, Griffin approached the well. The chains were already weakened by the repeated lightning strikes. The metal warped and softened. Using a nearby shovel as leverage, he managed to snap one link, then another. As the final chain gave way, an unearthly howl rose from the darkness trying to enter the well. It sensed what they intended and redoubled its efforts to prevent them. Griffin heaved the iron cover aside, exposing the well's mouth for the first time in decades. Immediately, a blinding column of light shot upward from the depths. Not darkness, but pure, radiant energy. Within it, Naomi could see faces, forms, the spirits of those thrown into the well, finally free. The darkness recoiled, shrinking back from the light. It tried to flee, but the spirits surrounded it, forming a barrier it could not penetrate. Now, Silas cried, raising his arms toward the sky. Join hands! Complete the circle! Griffin, Naomi, and Tokala rushed to comply, forming a circle around the well with Silas. Porter, recovered from his earlier injury, joined them, completing the five-pointed pattern. Silas began to chant, the others following his lead. The words came to Naomi instinctively, as if whispered directly into her mind by the spirits surrounding them. It was a song of binding, of justice, of final peace for the restless dead. The darkness writhed within its prison of light, shrinking further with each verse of the chant. The spirits of the well drew closer, their light intensifying until it was almost painful to behold. Among them, Naomi recognized Shadowhawk, her face peaceful now as she approached Tokala. Mother and son gazed at each other across the divide between worlds, a lifetime of separation healed in a single moment of recognition. Then, with a gesture of infinite tenderness, Shadowhawk reached out and touched the place where Griffin and Tokala's hands were joined. A pulse of light flowed from her to them, connecting the severed branches of her family tree. Thank you, Tokala whispered, tears streaming down his face. Mother, for never abandoning me. Shadowhawk smiled, then turned her attention to the trapped darkness. Her expression hardened with resolve. She raised her hands, and the other spirits followed suit. As one, they closed in on the entity, their light penetrating its darkness, unraveling its very essence. With a final defiant shriek, the darkness imploded, collapsing into itself until nothing remained but a single point of shadow that winked out of existence. The light from the well dimmed gradually, the spirits no longer bound by violence and injustice. One by one they began to fade, moving on to whatever awaited them beyond the veil of death. Shadowhawk was the last to depart. She approached the circle where her son and nephew still stood, hands joined. With ethereal fingers, she touched each of their faces in blessing, then Naomi's. To Naomi's enhanced perception, Shadowhawk's final words came clearly. Remember us, speak our names, keep our stories alive. Then she too was gone, leaving behind only a sense of peace that settled over the ranch like a gentle snow. The storm clouds dispersed, revealing a sky brilliant with stars and the full moon, now directly overhead. The air smelled clean, purified, as if the land itself had been cleansed of an ancient stain. Silas was the first to break the silence. It's done, the spirits are at rest. The entity is destroyed. Griffin released Naomi's hand, though reluctantly. And the well? Still a grave, the old man replied soberly, but no longer a prison. We should seal it again, out of respect. But the land is free now, as are you. Musitokala swayed on his feet, 15 years of possession taking their physical toll. What happens to me? He asked quietly. I've done terrible things. Wallace was a murderer who escaped justice for decades, Porter interjected, surprising them all with his vehemence. No court would convict you, even if they believed the truth. Griffin placed a hand on his cousin's shoulder. You have a home here if you want it. We've lost too many years already. Tokala's eyes filled with grateful tears. I would like that. Very much. As the men discussed practical matters, how to properly seal the well, what story to tell the townspeople, how to help Tokala recover, Naomi found herself drawn back to the house. The entity was gone, but something remained unfinished. In the nursery, the disturbing drawings still covered the walls, a record of Caroline's descent into obsession. The crude doll still lay in the cradle, its twig limbs now lifeless, the hair binding it dulled with age. With gentle hands, Naomi gathered the doll and carried it outside. Near the corral, she found a suitable spot and began to dig a small hole with her hands. When it was deep enough, she laid the doll to rest, covering it with earth. For Caroline, she whispered, and Eleanor, and all the others who suffered here. Griffin found her there, kneeling by the freshly turned earth. Without a word, he joined her, understanding instinctively what she had done. Will they find peace now? Naomi asked, thinking of the women who had come before her, whose fates remained uncertain. I believe so, Griffin replied. Whatever happened to them, the entity that caused their suffering is gone. Perhaps they too can move on. They remained there a moment longer, honoring the absent dead. Then Griffin helped Naomi to her feet, his touch gentle despite his strength. What happens now? She asked, echoing Tokala's earlier question. For us, I mean. While Griffin's eyes, so often guarded, were now open, vulnerable. That depends on you. Our marriage was arranged under false pretenses. My guilt, the entity's manipulation. If you wish to leave, to start anew elsewhere, I would understand. Naomi considered this possibility, a return to Boston, or perhaps a new city where no one knew her history. A place where she might blend in, hide her abilities as she always had, but the thought held no appeal. Not anymore. I don't want to leave, she said simply. I want to stay. With you. Relief and joy transformed Griffin's face, erasing years of guilt and solitude. Are you certain? This place has brought you nothing but danger and fear. Not just danger and fear, Naomi corrected, taking his hands in hers. Understanding, acceptance, connection. Things I've sought my whole life. She glanced toward the house where lights now burned warmly in the windows. Silas, Porter, and Tokala moved about inside, beginning the process of healing and rebuilding. Besides, she added, we have work to do. Shadowhawk asked us to remember them, to keep their stories alive. We can't do that if we're apart. Griffin drew her close, his embrace conveying what words could not. Gratitude, tenderness, the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. Then stay, he whispered against her hair. Stay and help me make this place what it should have been all along. Not a prison for the dead, but a home for the living. Above them, the full moon sailed serenely across the star-strewn sky, bearing witness to their covenant. And if the spirits of Sugarloaf Creek still watched from beyond the veil, they did so now with blessing rather than burden, guardians rather than ghosts, remembered rather than restless. In the days that followed, healing began. For Tokala, emerging from 15 years of possession. For Griffin, Griffin, reconciling with his past and embracing his future. For the land itself, no longer bound by ancient hatred. And for Naomi, who had journeyed west seeking only escape, but found instead a purpose, a place, and a love that accepted all of her, shadows, spirits, and all. 10 years later, Blackburn Ranch had transformed. No longer isolated, it had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where those with gifts like Naomi's could find understanding and community. The well remained sealed, not with fear, but with respect, a simple marker acknowledging those who had died there. Each year, on the anniversary of the confrontation with the entity, a ceremony was held, not a ritual of containment, but of remembrance. Names were spoken, stories told, history preserved. Tokala had become a teacher in the Thornwood School, educating a new generation about the true history of the region, ensuring that both tragedy and redemption were remembered. Porter had published his history of Sugarloaf Creek, though with significant revisions to his original theories. The book had brought attention to the massacre, leading eventually to official recognition and apology from the government. Silas, though now well into his 90s, continued to visit regularly, passing on his knowledge to those willing to learn, including Griffin and Naomi's adopted children, three orphans from Thornwood who showed varying degrees of sensitivity to the spirit world. And Griffin and Naomi, they had found in each other not just love, but partnership, two halves of a whole, working together to heal old wounds and create something new from the ashes of tragedy. On this particular evening, they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the land in gold and crimson. Griffin's arm rested comfortably around Naomi's waist. Her head leaned against his shoulder, the easy intimacy of a decade shared. "Any visitors today?" he asked, referring to the spirits Naomi still occasionally saw, though less frequently now that the land had found peace. "Just one," she replied with a smile. "Shadowhawk stopped by to see the children. She approves of your teaching Lily to ride, Sue." Griffin chuckled. She always did have opinions about how things should be done. They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the deepening twilight. The land stretched before them, no longer haunted but hallowed, scarred by history but healing, one season at a time. "Do you ever regret it?" Griffin asked suddenly. "Staying here? Choosing this life?" Naomi looked up at him, at the face she had come to know as well as her own, the strong features softened by time and happiness, the storm-gray eyes now peaceful as an evening sky. "Never," she said simply. "Not for a single moment." And as night fell gently over Sugarloaf Creek, the whispers that rose from the earth were no longer cries for vengeance, but the soft sighing of prairie grass, the sound of a land and its people finally at peace. As the seasons turned and years passed at Blackburn Ranch, the land's transformation mirrored that of its inhabitants. Where once the soil had refused to nurture even the simplest wildflower, gardens now bloomed in riotous color. The old well, sealed not with chains and locks, but with a circular stone carved with names of the dead, stood as a monument rather than a prison. On the 10th anniversary of what locals now called the Night of Spirits, Naomi stood on the porch watching as people gathered around tables set in the yard. Thornwood had come to the ranch, families with children, elders with walking sticks, even Victoria Clayton, elegant as ever in her tailored dress, helping arrange flowers on the memorial table. "Penny for your thoughts," Griffin said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Naomi accepted one, smiling. "Just marveling at how much has changed. Remember how they used to whisper when we came to town?" Griffin's laugh lines deepened. "Now they won't stop talking to us." He nodded toward Victoria, who was straightening a photograph of Judge Wallace. "Some surprises I never saw coming." Victoria had been the first to publicly support Porter's revised history of the Sugarloaf Creek Massacre. Her father's bank had even funded scholarships for Cheyenne youth, a small reparation for generations of silence. Across the yard, Silas sat beneath an oak tree, surrounded by children. At 97, his body had grown frail, but his voice remained strong as he taught the youngsters Cheyenne words and songs. Among them was 12-year-old Lily, Naomi, and Griffin's eldest adopted daughter, her attention rapt as the old man spoke of spirit ways. "She sees them too, doesn't she?" Griffin asked softly, following Naomi's gaze. "More clearly than I ever did," Naomi confirmed. "Last night she told me Shadowhawk had visited her again, showed her how to braid sweetgrass properly for the ceremony." Griffin's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Are you worried?" "No," Naomi said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "What I feared was the loneliness of it, the belief that I was mad or broken. She'll never know that fear." From the direction of the road came the sound of wagon wheels. Tokala arrived with his students from the Thornwood School, each carrying a paper lantern they had made. The children scattered to greet friends while Tokala approached the porch, a leather-bound book tucked under his arm. "Porter's new manuscript," he explained, handing it to Naomi. "He wanted your thoughts before publication." Unlike Porter's first scholarly work on the massacre, this was a personal account. Echoes and remembrance, a witness to the Sugarloaf Creek reconciliation. The dedication page read simply, "For Caroline and Eleanor, whose stories we finally heard." "Have you read it?" Naomi asked Tokala. "Parts. The section about that night. It's powerful." His eyes, clear now of the darkness that had once possessed him, held a quiet wisdom. He included the letters. Naomi nodded. After the confrontation with the entity, They had discovered a cache of letters in Wallace's house, correspondence from both Caroline and Eleanor, smuggled out of the ranch before their disappearances. The women had not been consumed or destroyed as they had feared. They had escaped, carrying within them fragments of the entity, knowing they could never return lest it reform completely. Their ultimate fates remained unknown, but their intentions, to protect others from what they endured, were finally understood. As twilight approached, everyone gathered in a wide circle around the sealed well. Silas, leaning on a carved staff, began the ceremony with a prayer in Cheyenne. Then one by one, people came forward to speak names aloud. Victims of the massacre, Caroline, Eleanor, others lost to the land's dark history. When it was Lily's turn, she stepped into the circle with unusual confidence for a child her age. In her hands, she held a small leather pouch identical to the one Naomi still kept. "I am the daughter of the memory keeper," she said in clear, ringing tones that carried across the gathering. "These are the names my mother taught me to remember." As Lily recited names Naomi had carefully taught her, Naomi felt a presence at her shoulder. Not Shadowhawk this time, but two women, faint but unmistakable. Carolyn and Eleanor, watching the ceremony with peaceful expressions. "You found your way back," Naomi whispered. Caroline's ghost smiled. "We've been watching, waiting until it was truly gone." "Thank you for finishing what we couldn't," Eleanor added, "for remembering us." When the ceremony concluded and lanterns were lit against the gathering darkness, Naomi found Griffin at the edge of the gathering, deep in conversation with Porter. "I've been thinking," she said when Porter excused himself, "about what Shadowhawk told me that night. To remember them, to speak their names." Griffin nodded, waiting for her to continue. "Lily called me Memory Keeper tonight. I think that's what I've become, what we've become together. Not just remembering, but teaching others to remember." Griffin wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they watched the lanterns floating like earthbound stars across their land. "Is that enough?" he asked, "after everything that happened?" Naomi thought of Caroline and Eleanor, finally at peace, of Tokala, teaching a new generation, of the land itself healing beneath their feet. "It's everything," she said. "It's how we make meaning from tragedy, how we ensure nothing is truly lost." As night deepened, the guests departed one by one until only family remained. Naomi and Griffin stood hand in hand by the sealed well, their three children asleep in the house, Silas dozing in a chair on the porch. The whispers from the earth had changed over the years, no longer cries for vengeance or pleas for release, but something gentler, almost like lullabies. "Do you ever regret choosing this life?" Griffin asked, echoing a question he had posed many times over the years. And as she always did, Naomi looked up at his beloved face, the silver now dominant in his dark hair, the storm gray eyes peaceful in a way they hadn't been when they first met, and gave the same answer. "Never, not for a single moment." But this time she added, "This isn't just the life I chose, Griffin. It's the one I was meant to find, the purpose I was born for. To keep the memories, to speak the names, to teach others to do the same. Not everyone gets to discover why they're here. We did." Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witnessing their covenant as they had for 10 years. And if spirits still watched from beyond the veil, Shadowhawk, Caroline, Eleanor, and all the others, they did so now as guardians of a promise kept, a story remembered, a land redeemed.